What's going on, everyone? During the last update we received about Diablo 4, the developers gave us a look at the new rogue class. And while that was exciting to see, we are now left wondering what the last class will be. So let's talk about what the potential options are, what we could see, and what we most likely will see as the last addition to the core game. Let's begin with the Amazon. I know a lot of people wanted the Amazon to be the class that was announced at last year's BlizzCon, but anyone that's actually been keeping up with Diablo 4 already knew that wasn't going to happen. This is primarily because Amazons are only women, and in D4 you will be able to select what gender your character will be, so naturally this excludes Amazons from that list. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that they won't add a class that has some of the characteristics that the Amazon had. As you can see on the table, I have a few question marks on the Amazon's row underneath the Crusader, Paladin, and Warrior. These are here because it is entirely possible that they add in one of these classes and give them access to javelin skills that are inspired by the Amazon. This would give players the best of both worlds. Sure, we still won't get the Amazon, but we have the rogue with her bow skills already, and we would get another class that I'm sure lots of players want, such as the Paladin, Crusader, or Warrior, and the javelin skill set. I personally think these skills would best fit the Warrior class or an entirely new class altogether, but I could see it working with the Crusader or Paladin as well. Next, we have the Assassin. I think it is entirely possible, if not guaranteed, that we will see the Assassin coming to Diablo 4. But if I had to bet on it, I'd say that it wouldn't be the 5th class coming at launch. This is mostly because we just got the addition of the Rogue, and I don't see them adding another dexterous character to the base game. As for the question mark underneath the Monk, I put this here because I believe we could see some of the Monk's kit incorporated into the Assassin's skill set, like using combat staves and getting access to mantras. I do believe though that the Monk and Assassin are different enough from one another that they could both be added into D4 and it wouldn't be an issue. And while we are on the topic of dexterous classes, I just want to say that it is highly unlikely that we will see the Demon Hunter making a return in Diablo 4. That's why I excluded them from this list. They are just way too similar to what the Rogue is shaping up to be. So unless they entirely overhaul the Demon Hunter, I wouldn't expect them to be coming to this installment of Diablo. The next class, the Bard, is an interesting one because they only appeared in an expansion pack for Diablo 1 called Diablo Hellfire. And as a matter of fact, they were an unfinished class, meaning they could only be played after editing one of the game files. Now despite this, they are still worth mentioning because after the D4 devs went all the way back to Diablo 1 for the Rogue, it leaves everything in between as a potential option for the 5th addition to the roster. If you look at the row for the Bard, they have the most question marks across the board. And that is because the Bard was considered a jack of all trades, but a master of none in Diablo. They had balanced attributes, giving them enough of each to use everything in the game, but not enough to specialize in any one of them. They were also the first class that could dual wield, which allowed them to benefit from the stats of 2 different weapons. But they didn't sing songs or play instruments like we see from bards in other RPG games. So what does this mean for Diablo 4? Well, if they do bring the Bard, we could see something similar to the Scion from Path of Exile. A class that isn't very good at one thing, but can be used for very niche builds and scenarios. Or, we could see a melee spellcasting hybrid or a singing lute-playing maniac. Personally, I can't see them going down the Scion route. That sort of character design wouldn't fit well with the current D4 systems. And there's just something about playing lutes, flutes, and harps that sort of takes away from the dark dinginess that the Diablo universe has to offer. So that just leaves a melee spellcasting hybrid, which if done right, could be a really interesting addition to the Diablo universe. What do you guys think? Would you like to see the Bard in D4? And if so, what would you want their design to be like? Okay, on to the Cleric. The Cleric was apparently the class that was going to come with the second expansion of Diablo 2. But as I'm sure most of you are aware, that expansion was never created. Now when I think of a Cleric, I think of a healing and buffing support class on steroids that can also deal its fair share of damage to undead enemies. But in a Twitter post from David Brevik where he shared that it was indeed a Cleric that they were working on for the second expansion, someone asked, "Think a healer would actually do well in an action RPG?" And David responded with, "Who said it was a healer?" Now that leaves me wondering, what possible angles could the devs have been looking at for their version of the Cleric? Not being a healer still leaves the option of a buffing support type character, and in Diablo 3 with group play, we did see some classes being forced into a support role even if that wasn't the developer's intention for them. The D4 devs may have noticed this and might take a chance on creating Diablo's first real support character as the Cleric. And this idea makes even more sense if you take a look at their skills and PvP systems that are really shaping up to have a MOBA type of vibe. Part of me is all on board for the idea of support classes, especially if they plan to support Diablo 4 for years to come with even more content. But I could see how it might be frustrating for the players that don't have anyone to play with or only want to play with themselves. They might feel slighted or like they aren't getting their money's worth if they will be ignoring a class entirely because of its functionality. Because of this reason, I doubt they will be adding in a class that will be strictly supportive. The Cleric would most likely have some support built into its kit, while also being able to deal damage. It would be really interesting to see if they could create a more active support role for the class instead of setting an aura and forgetting about it though. If they were to add the Cleric, what would you guys like to see from the class? Would you want to see a support-like design? Or would you prefer the Cleric be able to stand on its own without having to rely on other classes for damage? So now we're going to skip over the next few classes because I think they are pretty straightforward and we'll touch on them briefly towards the end of the video. What I really want to talk about is the Warrior. As I mentioned earlier with the Warrior, it's quite possible that we see the class making a return with some skills adopted from the Amazon. But how else could they make this class unique from other melee classes? And that's a good question. It's something I've thought about quite a bit, but outside of javelin abilities, I've had a hard time thinking of what other melee skills they could bring to the table that would set them apart from the Barbarian. Maybe this is another situation where the class has more of a role, like being tankier or being able to control the battlefield a little bit more than other melee classes. But I think what we should be looking at are the potential hybrid roles that could come from another melee class and not necessarily just a warrior. Looking at the chart, you'll see in the warrior row I have question marks under the bard, necro, and sorceress. These are here because I believe there is a small chance that the developers give us a completely new class that hasn't been seen in the Diablo universe. Maybe we'll get an axe-wielding, spell-slinging battle mage that falls under the bard and sorceress categories. Or, what I would really love to see, a Death Knight type of class. A warrior necromancer hybrid that can summon undead, plague his enemies with disease, and crush their skulls with one- or two-handed melee weapons. The best part about a class like this is it would be different enough that they could still add the necromancer, and it fits perfectly with the theme of Diablo. This is the class that I would want to see coming on launch. Okay, after all that, what do I actually think the 5th class will be? Well, there's the Diablo 3 classes, the Crusader, Monk, and Witch Doctor that I didn't really talk about. And my reason for that is, I don't think the developers would want to take the risk of putting any one of those in on launch. And they most likely won't risk adding a completely new class either. Right now, the Diablo fanbase is very volatile, and something like adding the Crusader or Witch Doctor to the core game could set the internet ablaze. Sure, they could probably put the Monk in and people would definitely be upset, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as bad as adding one of the other two classes. It is my firm belief that the devs will go with a class they know will be a win for them. And what class would that be? Well, the Paladin or the Necromancer, of course. And since we got the Necromancer towards the end of Diablo 3, and it has been almost 10 years since we've seen the Paladin, I'd be willing to bet all of my money that the last class will be the Paladin. What class do you guys want to see added to the core game? Are you one of the people that would like to see a class from Diablo 3 making a return? And if so, which class would you want and why would you want them? Thanks for watching, guys. If you liked the video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe for more gaming related content.